Maureen Brubaker-Farley was 17, new in Cedar Rapids, just trying to keep life moving forward. Then she vanished on the morning of September 17th, 1971. By September 24th, she was found dead in a wooded ravine, placed on the trunk of an abandoned junk car. Authorities confirmed sexual assault and a fatal blow to the head. The question her family lived with didn't last days. It lasted 50 years. Cedar Rapids, Iowa is known as the City of Five Seasons, and by many accounts it's a place people see as quiet and safe. So when authorities reported a teenage girl had been found murdered outside the city, it shook the community. From the start, investigators said this case would be difficult, and police said it might come down to one small detail, the kind of clue that's easy to miss early, but later becomes everything. Police said two teenagers made the discovery in a wooded ravine off Ely Road SW. They noticed an abandoned junk car down in the ravine and walked closer. That's when they saw it, a young woman's body on the trunk. The teens reported what they found, bringing Cedar Rapids police and investigators to the scene. Officials later said the victim was partially unclothed, and the scene suggested she had been there for some time. Officers responded quickly. They secured the area and started searching for any sign of recent activity. Tire tracks, footprints, anything that could explain how she ended up there. Investigators treated it as a crime scene, because they believed what happened likely didn't start in that ravine. But that's where the evidence had to speak. One detail didn't fit. She had no shoes, and reports said her feet were clean. To investigators, that suggested she likely didn't walk into the ravine on her own. They believed she had been moved. Officials later confirmed evidence of sexual assault, and that changed the direction of the case. The location was described as isolated, a wooded ravine off Ely Road SW outside Cedar Rapids near a landfill. Investigators believed places like that can be chosen to keep a victim out of sight and buy time. Investigators waited on the medical examiner, because without a forensic report, you don't have a case, you have questions. Officials later confirmed Maureen Brubaker-Farley died from a blow to the head that caused a skull fracture. They also confirmed evidence of sexual assault. That made it clear this was a homicide, and it was violent. And in 1971, building a case was slower. Without modern tools, leads didn't lock in easily. Officials later confirmed the victim was 17-year-old Maureen Brubaker-Farley, last seen alive the morning of September 17, 1971. Reported missing, September 20th, 1971. Found, September 24th, 1971. Everything between those dates became the gap investigators tried to rebuild. The first alarm came from her job. In early accounts, a manager at a local diner was described as the first person to contact police after Maureen didn't show up for what was said to be her third scheduled shift. Those same accounts described her as reliable, the kind of employee who would usually call if something was wrong. In those retellings, the manager went to check on her where she was staying. No obvious signs of a struggle were described, but one detail stood out. Her work uniform was reportedly missing. What is confirmed is the report date. Officials later said she was reported missing on September 20th, 1971. From there, investigators pulled at every thread. Some accounts said she had recently moved to Cedar Rapids from Sioux City, and reports also said she was married, and her husband, David Farley, was incarcerated at the time, which may have been part of why she was in the area. As the missing person investigation unfolded, later retellings said Cedar Rapids police sent officers to Sioux City to speak with Maureen's mother, Mary. Family can confirm routines, contacts, and what normal looked like before someone vanished. Those same accounts described Mary as terrified for her daughter's safety. She believed Maureen couldn't have just disappeared. And according to those retellings, 4 days later, officers returned with the worst news. Maureen was dead. Mary may have feared something bad had happened, but hearing the body had been found left her speechless. For her family, this wasn't a headline. It was Maureen. They remembered her as bright, funny, and responsible. She was born on July 4th, and her mother later said that spirit showed in everything she did. Family stories described how close she was to her siblings, especially her younger sister, Lisa. how she took on responsibility early, like she felt she had to. Later retellings also included her personal story. As a teenager, Maureen fell in love with David Farley. People said they married young. Reports said David was incarcerated after a bad check scheme and received a sentence. And in those accounts, Maureen's move to Cedar Rapids to stay close to him became part of the story investigators tried to understand. Investigators didn't have much they could turn into a name. This was 1971, long before DNA became routine. So the case leaned on interviews, routines, contacts. In early accounts, police searched the place Maureen had been staying and looked through personal writings trying to understand who was in her life. Those same retellings said nothing of obvious value was taken, though the work uniform was mentioned as possibly missing. Then came a detail that stood out in reports. A dorm manager said that on the day Maureen disappeared, sometime after noon, she heard calm voices in Maureen's room. One voice was described as low. She didn't see the man, but she remembered a strong tobacco smell with a sweet edge. After that, reports said the trail went cold again. Investigators couldn't find anyone who saw Maureen after that point. When the investigation stalled, detectives started rebuilding Maureen's last known contacts. In early accounts, a co-worker said Maureen mentioned plans for Friday night, meeting an old friend from Sioux City. Those accounts named the man, Bobby Moore. Police treated him as an early person of interest and looked closely at his background. Reports described a troubled history, including arrests and allegations of domestic violence. Some retellings also claimed Maureen's husband warned her to stay away. Later accounts said Moore was seen in Cedar Rapids after Maureen disappeared, saying he came to help search. And later retellings said that on the day Maureen's body was found, he voluntarily entered a psychiatric facility in Sioux City. Moore denied involvement. There were mentions of an alibi and even a polygraph in later retellings, but as the case was described publicly, investigators did not present clear evidence tying him to the murder, and attention shifted to other names. The investigation widened. Later retellings described detectives looking closely at men Maureen had been around in Cedar Rapids. One name rose fast: Gary Castle. Some accounts claimed Castle had been David Farley's cellmate and that he may have crossed paths with Maureen during prison visits. Then came the detail that made investigators stop. Reports said detectives found a photo of Maureen in Castle's wallet. Investigators tried to track Castle's movements after his release, looking for anything that placed him near Maureen during the critical window. There were suggestions he had become fixated on her. Castle denied involvement. Later retellings said he could account for his whereabouts on September 17, 1971, and without proof tying him to the crime, that lead didn't produce an arrest. Detectives went back to Maureen's workplace. In early accounts, they re-interviewed co-workers and regular customers, hoping for one solid detail. That's when a man named George entered the story. Those retellings described him as a regular who claimed he saw Maureen with a man who looked hippie-like around the time she vanished. Reports said Maureen's husband didn't trust George and pushed investigators to look closely at him. In later retellings, George offered help and talked about connections, even suggesting he could help get David out of prison. George reportedly said he was at work during key hours, and some versions said police checked his schedule and treated it as an alibi. Still, the case didn't break. No charges, no answers. And by the early 1972 timeframe, the investigation was described as going cold. For Maureen's family, that meant years of waiting. The case didn't disappear. It went quiet. For decades. Then it came back, when technology finally caught up to the questions investigators couldn't answer in 1971. Officials and later reports said that in 2006, Detective Doug Larison reopened the file and located evidence that could be tested for DNA. A lab developed a complete male DNA profile and entered it into a federal database. No match. After that, the investigation became the slow grind of a cold case. A profile without a name. A lead that only works if someone, somewhere, is in the system. Later coverage described investigators revisiting the original suspect pool, tracking people down, and collecting comparison swabs when possible. Reports said more than 15 men were eliminated through DNA comparisons, but the pattern kept repeating: DNA, effort, dead end. In 2018, a new tool changed American investigations. Genetic genealogy helped identify the Golden State Killer. Detectives in Cedar Rapids hoped the same approach could help here. According to later accounts, they sent a remaining sample to a private lab for genealogy-style testing. The answer came back. The sample was too degraded. In other words, the science couldn't read it that way. So the team went back to rechecking, comparing, rebuilding. That's when attention returned to George Smith. Retellings described him as the friendly diner regular who raised suspicions decades earlier. And the key issue was simple. He had never been DNA tested. Investigators learned Smith had died in 2013 at 94. Then a small detail reportedly caught someone's eye in his obituary. He was known for a sweet, tobacco-like smell. To one investigator, that rang a bell. Years earlier, a dorm manager had mentioned a sweet tobacco odor near Maureen's room on the day she vanished. If those details connected, it suggested something darker. George Smith may not have been where he claimed he was. Detectives didn't treat George Smith like a random name anymore. They treated him like a person with a life, a routine, and an opportunity. Later accounts said that in 1971, Smith had recently divorced. He reportedly lived just a few blocks from the dorm where Maureen was staying. Reports also said Smith worked in sanitation, meaning he knew roads around the landfill area. To investigators, that connection mattered. They considered exhumation to get DNA, but later accounts said his remains had been cremated. No direct sample. So investigators changed strategy. Reports said Detective Matt Denlinger tracked down Smith's daughter and obtained a DNA sample. It went to the lab. Later reports said the comparison pointed back to George Smith, identifying him as the man behind the murder of 17-year-old Maureen. When the results came in, the date hit the team hard. 50 years, almost to the day. Later accounts described how the news reached Maureen's family. A call they never expected after 5 decades. Detective Matt Denlinger later remembered calling Maureen's sister Lisa. He said her reaction was immediate and emotional. And then she said something that stopped him cold. "My mom is here. Tell her." In those retellings, Denlinger admitted he didn't even realize Maureen's mother was still alive, and he was grateful he could say it out loud. They finally had an answer. No one can publicly say exactly what happened step by step that day. What follows is investigative theory, not a confirmed play-by-play. Investigators later suggested Maureen's contact with George Smith wasn't random, and that at some point the situation turned violent. In their view, he may have drawn her in under a pretense of help, then tried to force something she didn't want. When she resisted, things could have escalated fast. What later reporting supports is the broader outline: a fatal head injury and evidence of sexual assault. Beyond that, specifics remain theory. Investigators believed the person responsible then worked to hide what happened, moving her body to an isolated ravine and leaving it on the trunk of an abandoned car, where it was ultimately discovered. Even when a case is solved, the pain doesn't just disappear. For Maureen's family, answers brought relief, but they also reopened old wounds. And according to later accounts, not everyone lived long enough to hear the truth. Investigators often say cases like this leave 2 messages behind. Families shouldn't have to carry silence forever, and time doesn't erase responsibility. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments what hit you hardest: the decades without answers, or how close the suspect may have been to everyday life. And if you want more true crime told with care and clarity, subscribe.
It was the night of January 31st, 2019, in the quiet university town of Hull, England. Around 8:30 p.m., 21-year-old student Libby Squire left her dorm to meet friends. The plan was simple: a few drinks, some games, laughter, and later a night out at a popular local club. By 10 p.m., Libby texted her boyfriend Connor saying goodnight and that she'd left her phone at home. It would be the last message she ever sent. At 11:20 p.m., CCTV footage captured the group arriving at the club. Everyone went in except Libby. She was clearly intoxicated, barely able to stand, and the security staff refused to let her inside. Her friends decided to call a cab, gave the driver cash, and told him to take her straight home. They watched the taxi drive away, believing she'd be safe. Hours later, when the party ended, they texted her roommate. But Libby had never come home. Cold winds swept through the streets of Hull that night, and by dawn, a missing person investigation was already underway. When police began their search, one question haunted everyone. Had Libby chosen to disappear? Her friends and family said absolutely not. In the days before she vanished, she'd been happy, laughing, full of plans for the future. Libby loved her housemates, and she'd just received glowing marks for her winter coursework. She was a second-year philosophy student at the University of Hull. Bright, funny, endlessly curious. Friends described her as the kind of person who lit up every room she walked into. At home, she was deeply connected to her family, her parents, Lisa and Russell, her younger brother and two sisters. They were incredibly close. Lisa would later say that Libby was the soul of our family. But behind her confidence, there had been struggles. Libby had battled an eating disorder in her teens, and for a time, she hurt herself when life felt overwhelming. Still, she fought hard, pushed through, and found new strength in university life. After a short academic break, she spent time traveling in Paris, came back renewed, ready to move forward. She had a loving boyfriend, Connor, a circle of friends who adored her, and dreams of becoming a journalist after graduation. By all accounts, Libby Squire had every reason to live, to hope, and to believe in tomorrow, which made her disappearance all the more impossible to understand. Within hours, news of Libby's disappearance spread across Hull. Her name and face were everywhere, on posters, on social media, on local news bulletins. Police quickly tracked down the taxi driver who'd taken her home. He said he'd dropped Libby off on Wellesley Avenue, watched her walk toward her front door, but she never went inside. Investigators began piecing together the timeline using surveillance footage. The cameras showed Libby wandering the nearby streets around 11:37 p.m. Just minutes later, two passers-by found her lying in the snow. She was crying, disoriented, and refused their help. Another group of students saw her soon after, invited her to come in and warm up, but Libby kept walking. It was bitterly cold that night. Experts later said she might have already been suffering from the first signs of hypothermia, confusion, exhaustion, impaired judgment. Her friends contacted police when she failed to come home, and by morning, a major search operation was underway. Officers, students, and volunteers combed through parks, alleys, and backyards. Helicopters scanned the riverbanks. The city was blanketed with posters of her face. But there was still no trace of Libby. No phone, no witnesses, no signs of struggle. Just a trail that seemed to fade into the frozen night. Days passed with no breakthrough, and then a new lead changed everything. A man who lived near the local playing fields told police that, around 12:15 a.m., he was woken by the sound of a woman screaming. The cries were so loud that he checked his phone for the time. When he looked out the window, he saw a man hurrying back to a car. Investigators now had a crucial time frame, about 30 to 40 minutes between the moment Libby was last seen on the street and when the screams were heard. That window would soon reveal something disturbing. Reviewing the surveillance footage frame by frame, officers noticed a silver car circling the same neighborhood for hours that night. It kept driving up and down the quiet streets, as if looking for someone. Just before midnight, the car stopped at the end of the road near where Libby had been walking. The driver got out and followed her. At first, it seemed like she was standing near a bus stop, but she wasn't waiting for a bus. She was trying to find her way home. The man crossed the street again, this time walking in the same direction as her. Moments later, he spoke to Libby. For the next 5 minutes, they walked together, away from her house. The car waited nearby, engine running. At 12:08 a.m., Libby got into the car. It was the last time she was ever seen alive. Later, her broken wristwatch would be found in that same area. Investigators believed she might have been grabbed or forced inside. If the car had been parked just 1 meter further down the road, the security camera might have missed it entirely. But now police finally had something to follow: a car, a time, and a man who had vanished into the night. In the early hours of February 6th, police made an arrest. The man behind the wheel of that silver car was Pavel Relowich, a 24-year-old butcher, husband, and father of 2. On paper, Pavel looked like the perfect neighbor. He'd moved from Poland as a teenager, studied at a local culinary college, and lived just a short walk from where Libby was last seen. To everyone around him, he was polite, smiling, quiet, the kind of man who'd hold the door open for strangers. But investigators soon discovered another side of him, a side that had been hiding in plain sight. Relowich wasn't just a family man. For nearly 2 years, he'd been breaking into homes, spying on women through their windows, stealing their underwear, and exposing himself in the streets around Hull. He'd never been caught. Each time, he vanished before police could link the DNA or fingerprints left behind. But now, the match was there, and it connected him to multiple sexual offenses across the city. Neighbors were stunned. "He was just normal," one woman said. "We saw him jogging every night, smiling, always waving." What no one knew was that those late-night runs weren't for fitness. They were for hunting. A week had passed since Libby's disappearance. Police searched Relowich's home, but found nothing unusual. Then they opened his car. Inside was a disturbing collection: women's underwear, adult toys, used condoms, photos of women taken without their knowledge, and items stolen from nearby homes. Whatever image Pavel Relowich had built of himself, it was collapsing fast. But when detectives confronted him, he had a story ready. He claimed he'd seen Libby walking alone that night, cold, drunk, confused, and that he simply wanted to help. "I'm a good Samaritan," he told them. He said he offered her a ride home, dropped her off near the playing fields, and then went back home to watch porn on his phone. It wasn't a confession, but it placed him at the scene, and combined with the witness who'd heard the screams, detectives knew this was no longer a missing person case. It was something far darker. Soon after, police charged Relowich with 13 sexual offenses, but still couldn't yet prove what had happened to Libby. Then 7 weeks later, a fisherman made a gruesome discovery in the Humber estuary. 7 weeks after Libby vanished, a fisherman spotted something floating in the Humber estuary. It was a body, badly decomposed, barely recognizable. Around the neck hung a small necklace with a single silver letter, L. The medical examiner confirmed what everyone feared. It was Libby Squire. Tests revealed that she'd been sexually assaulted before her death, but the cause of death could not be determined. Her body had been in the water too long. The examiner said she might have been strangled or drowned. Police believed her body was dumped in a pond near the playing fields before drifting into the Humber River. For her mother, Lisa, the news was heartbreaking. Libby was terrified of water, she said. She could barely swim, and the thought that she might still have been alive when she was in that water, it's almost too painful to imagine. When the case turned from a disappearance to a murder, Lisa posted a message online. "My darling girl, thank you for choosing me as your mom. I tried to protect you as best I could. I'm so sorry I couldn't save you that night." By August 2019, 7 long months had passed since Libby disappeared. Pavel Relowich now stood trial, not for murder, but for a series of other crimes. At first, he denied everything, but at the last moment, he changed his plea, admitting to 9 separate offenses: 4 counts of voyeurism, 2 of outraging public decency, and 3 burglaries committed between 2017 and 2019. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, later reduced to 6 after appeal. For investigators, that sentence wasn't justice, but it was time. Time to build their case without the risk of Relowich escaping. Detectives combed through thousands of hours of CCTV footage, tracing every movement he made that night. and one image in particular caught their attention. Around 2:30 a.m., the same silver car reappeared near the exact spot where Libby had vanished hours earlier. It stayed for just a few minutes, then drove away toward the city. Not long after, 2 women reported a man exposing himself on that same street. It was Relowich. He'd come back, not to help, but to cover his tracks. Months passed, and then is the breakthrough investigators had been waiting for. Forensic results came back. Pavel Relowich's DNA was found on Libby's body, inside her body. When confronted with the results, Relowich changed his story again. He claimed that what happened between them was consensual, that Libby had made the first move. But detectives didn't believe him. They knew the truth. A drunk, freezing young woman had no strength left to consent or to defend herself. For investigators, the DNA was the final piece of the puzzle. They could finally prove that Libby Squire hadn't simply disappeared. She had been taken, and she had been killed. In October 2019, hundreds gathered for Libby's funeral. 2 weeks later, prosecutors made their move. After months of waiting, Pavel Relowich was formally charged with the rape and murder of Libby Squire. When prosecutors finally charged Pavel Relowich with the rape and murder of Libby Squire, officers read the indictment aloud, slowly, clearly. Through a translator, he heard the words rape and murder, and then he laughed. To those in the car, it was chilling. The sound of a man completely detached from what he'd done. His mother later told reporters, "I feel it in my heart. Pavel would never hurt that girl. He's a good man, a man who respects women." But even she admitted, if he truly did it, then he must face the punishment he deserves. For Lisa Squire, Libby's mother, that moment, seeing the man accused of destroying her daughter's life, was almost impossible to endure. But she stayed silent, composed, determined to see justice done. The trial would soon begin, and the world would finally hear what really happened on that cold winter night. January 2021. After years of waiting, the trial of Pavel Relowich finally began. Prosecutors described him as a man driven by obsession, a predator who saw women as objects and took pleasure in their fear. They told the jury that on the night of January 31st, 2019, Relowich spotted Libby alone, drunk and freezing, and in that moment, she became his target. He knew exactly what he was going to do, the prosecutor said. If it hadn't been Libby, it would have been someone else. Relowich claimed it was consensual, but the evidence, her injuries, the DNA, the timeline, told a different story. Cameras showed his car leaving the park at 12:20 a.m., just minutes after a witness heard desperate screams. The prosecution argued that within those 10 minutes, Libby was assaulted and killed. They didn't need to prove every detail. The science, the footage, the patterns of his past crimes, they all spoke for themselves. When watching women stopped being enough, the prosecutor said, he escalated. This time, he didn't just watch, he took. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. The world waited for their verdict. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury returned. Their verdict was clear: guilty. Pavel Relowich was convicted of the rape and murder of Libby Squire. The judge called it an unimaginable act of cruelty. He sentenced Relowich to life in prison with a minimum of 27 years before he can ever be considered for release. Libby Squire had no chance that night, the judge said. None at all. If Relowich is ever released, he will be watched for the rest of his life. But for Libby's family, the sentence brought no relief. After the verdict, Relowich's wife packed her things and returned to Poland with their children. She said she never truly knew the man she had married. He was kind, loving, devoted, she said. The truth broke me. It wasn't the man I thought I knew. For Lisa Squire, Libby's mother, grief became her mission. She began fighting to change the laws, to make sure so-called minor sexual crimes would never be ignored again. Together with police, she launched a campaign urging people to report every sexual offense, no matter how small. Because it always starts small, she said, and then one day, it doesn't stop. In 2022, Lisa Squire made a decision few could understand. She asked to meet Pavel Relowich, the man who took her daughter's life. He agreed. She said she didn't want forgiveness, she wanted answers. "I don't hate him," Lisa said. "I don't even feel angry, I just need to know what happened. Those final 20 minutes of her life. Nothing he could tell me," she said, "would ever be worse than what I already imagine." But in February 2023, Relowich changed his mind. He refused to meet. He claimed the media had painted him unfairly, and that he no longer wanted to speak with Lisa. For her, it was another loss, not of her daughter, but of the truth. "Maybe that's how he keeps control," she said, "by staying silent." Every morning, Lisa Squire says, there's a moment between sleep and waking when life feels normal again. And then she remembers Libby's gone. "Sometimes the grief just hits me," she says. "I look at her photos, the ones I've seen 1,000 times, and I cry wondering how someone could take such a beautiful person from this world." But even in the silence that follows, Lisa refuses to let her daughter's story fade. She fights for change, for justice, for every woman whose voice was ignored. Because remembering Libby means refusing to forget what happened.